Om Asato Ma Sat Gamaya Tamaso Homaham Jyotir Gamaya Mrityormam Amrita Gamaya Avir Avir Maidhi Rudra Yate Dakshinam Mukha Te Namaham Paha Inityam. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. And reach us through and through ourselves. And evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. This light is very bright. My subject this morning is the spectrum of consciousness. It is an esoteric subject. It comes to us out of the framework of the Tantra tradition in India. The different schools of Tantra worship God as Shiva, Shakti, that is, as consciousness and power. Shiva is the principle, the masculine principle of pure consciousness. Shakti is the feminine principle of creative power. Shiva and Shakti are one, like milk and its whiteness, like fire and its power to burn. And in the beginning, Shiva and Shakti existed as one only without a second. And as in the macrocosm, so also in the microcosm of ourselves, we also, in the beginning, we also existed of infinite Satchidananda, that is, we had infinite being, infinite consciousness, infinite power. In the beginning, we were omniscient, we were omnipresent, all-pervading, conscious being, one only without a second. But the tragedy of man is that we fell from grace. We fell from this high state. And, well, imagine if you were flying in an airplane. Maybe you're skydiving. And there you are, you're a couple miles up there. And you have several friends. They're going to go first. They went first. There's your friend standing in front of you. He jumps out. There you see him going down. He's like your alter ego. You can visualize yourself falling down. He's becoming smaller and smaller. Here he's crying. He's weaker and weaker. You think, oh, that's me. But then you have to jump out. You also jump out. There you are, flying, going down through that rarefied high altitude, down through that in the atmosphere. It gets grosser and grosser till pretty soon you land on the earth. One fine day, you're born on the earth, and you're a little baby. And you don't know where you are, and you don't know who you are, and you don't know anything. and you're in total ignorance. And you're not infinite, you're very small, you're finite, you're virtually powerless. And you don't have much consciousness of what's going on, so you have a big project ahead of you. Now you have to grow. You have to raise your consciousness. Now it's said that when we fell, when our consciousness fell, it fell through 7 different stages. These are the 7 echelons of angels. And these stages of consciousness, the Mooladhara, Swadisthana, the Manipura, the Anahata, the Vishuddha, the Agya, the Sahasrara, that's from the lower to the higher. These are sometimes called in Sanskrit, in the Tantric scriptures, they're called the Agamas. They're not the Vedas, they're not the Upanishads. In the Tantric tradition, these stages of consciousness are called Chakras. And a chakra just means a wheel of power. And we can imagine a wheel turning around and around with the spokes driving, moving forward, downward, inward, and upward in a great cycle, powering the vehicle forward. Sometimes these stages of consciousness are called lotuses. That is, they're like a flower, just like a wheel. It's kind of, if you look at a wheel, it's kind of like, it looks like a flower in a way. That is, the petals are kind of like the spokes of the flower. And so oftentimes these stages are called, so we can imagine, if you can imagine these wheels, 7 wheels, kind of horizontally in a hierarchy. These are sometimes called lotuses. And if we look at any one of those lotus, we'll find that, or any one of those chakras, we'll find that if we look more closely, we find they're very complex in their content as they're represented in the ancient scriptures and the old magical tantric diagrams. That is, each lotus, let's take, for example, the 12-petaled lotus of the heart chakra. If we look, each one of those petals are all, well, everything is color coordinated for one thing. It's like the rainbow. These are vermilion colored petals. Each one is marked with a syllable of the Sanskrit alphabet. Each syllable, of course, has mystic significance. Ka, ha, ga, ga. Like that, it goes around the 12 petals. 12 sacred letters of the mystical alphabet. And then there are in the middle part, there are triangles, which you've seen. That's the sacred hexagram, 2 triangles. The earth and material facing upward, and the divine power downward. This is what in ancient Jewish tradition, I guess, was called the Star of David. There in the middle, you see that. In the middle of that there's a hexagram. In the hexagram, there's a more sacred symbols of the bija mantras, and of the presiding deity of this particular stage of consciousness, which in the case of the heart, just as an example, is Vayu, So there is Vayu, the god Vayu, riding on a dark-colored antelope. And then there's more. There's an image of Shiva, an aspect of Shiva. Shiva has many aspects. This is just one of his aspects. On the right side is looking at it. On the left side, you'll see the presiding feminine deity. Everything is kind of like yin and yang. It's kind of like a wonderful study for a Jungian psychologist. There you've got the two aspects. And each one of those, of course, each one of those gods and goddesses have all of their attributes and all of their accessories, each one of which is laden with symbolism. So that's the chakras. Each one of these chakras is associated with the nervous system and the glandular system in our body, that is the endocrine system. Each chakra associated maybe with some plexus or some gland or some organ of the body. But if you were to read in a Western book on Western medicine, or any book on anatomy, you'll find no mention of these chakras. And you'll find no mention of these 7 plexuses either. I mean, there are nerve plexuses, but they're not nice, neat little 7 plexuses as we would visualize. In fact, this whole system comes to us as part of kind of, it's not in the physical body. That is, it is in the subtle and the causal body. It's part of the occult dynamics of the psyche. This today, in our consciousness now, we're talking about our own consciousness. Our own consciousness, we live and we operate in the 3 lower centers of this spectrum. Let's look a little bit about some of those aspects of those lower centers. A little bit about, and we're not talking about all of the I gave you the analysis there of the anahata. We're not going into the occult numerology and the mystical significance of the Sanskrit language, the philosophy of language that's embedded in this system. And we're not going to be talking about the worship of the deities. I'm going to focus here discussing for our own point of view our psychology and our own spiritual growth. Let's look here at the very lowest center. It's called the Mooladhara. That is the root chakra, which is at the very base of the spine. And this is a chakra which is associated with our survival needs. Our survival needs, that is food and water and shelter. And let's say that you're a survivalist. And maybe you are going to practice your survival skills. And all you got is you got your Marine K-bar knife. That's all you got. And so you go off into the wilderness. And now you're off in the wilderness. And many miles, maybe you've been helicoptered in there and you've been dropped down. Now you have to survive. And now what is you going to do? If this is not the time for philosophy. This is the time for first you have to get some shelter. You have to protect yourself from the rain and the wind and the snow. How are you going to make a shelter? Well, this is all brought out. Now your whole consciousness on how to build some kind of a protection from the elements. Then you have to think about how are you going to get food? How are you going to get water? Just water. Well, if you happen to be by a nice river or something, that would be easy. But what if you haven't got any lake? You haven't got any river? And you have to have water. Then you have to have something to keep you warm. You would have to make fire. All of these are huge problems in the mind. Then when you're in here, you get inside your little shelter there. Maybe you have something to eat. Now you have to worry about security. This is the security center. You have to worry about mosquitoes and snakes and bears and everything that may attack you. So that's the Mooladhara Chakra. We also worry, well, we don't worry about those things because we've pretty well taken care of those basic needs, but we do worry about paying our bills, about something terrible will happen. You know, may lose your job, may lose our house. At that time, we're operating at the Mooladhara Chakra level of consciousnness, somewhat higher than that. We're going to talk about hierarchy in a little bit. But higher than that is the level it's called the Swadisthana Chakra. Sometimes called the sacral plexus. This is what is often referred to as the pleasure center of consciousness. It's at this kind of level of consciousness when we are concerned with the gratification of the senses and of our self-conscious physical ego self. It's all about that sensation center. It's a center. It's all about the appetites of the senses, the desire to see and to hear and to listen. This is a center. It's all about sexuality, about sensuality, and about sense objects. The mind and the senses are preoccupied with their objects. This is the pleasure center of our consciousness. And you can maybe visualize yourself sitting on a beach chair in Hawaii. There you are, and soaking up the sun, and you're sitting at your feet in that beautiful white calcium carbonate sand. There you sit there in the white sand with a blue drink by you. You're listening maybe to your music, and you're thinking about that big feast you're going to go to, that big Hawaiian luau you're going to go to tonight, and how you're going to eat and drink, and you're going to have such a wonderful time. You're now in the Swadisthana Chakra. That's the pleasure center. And so we know all about that. A little bit higher than that is at the level of the solar plexus. That is the Manipura Chakra. And the Manipura Chakra is all about power. This we could call the power center. It's about, well, first of all, of course, it's about self-empowerment and about doing things. How can we achieve our goals? How can we achieve success and achieve everything that we want to in this life? And so about attaining success for our self, for our ego self. It's also about power. It's about power politics. Maybe not about federal or state or city politics, but it's more about our own social system, the play of power, of interpersonal relationships that we have with others. And that's all this level of the solar plexus. It's a level of our consciousness. They call it the power center. It's all about buying power. That is, it's about materialism, about consumerism. Of course, it's all symbolized by the almighty dollar, about worship of the golden calf. And so this is the Manipura, is called the Manipura Chakra. And let's see where I am here. This is the Manipura Chakra. And this is so these are the three lower centers, which is kind of where we are today. The Manipura Chakra was very well analyzed by the psychologist Alfred Adler. His psychology was all about the will to power. And sometimes people contrast it with something for example, of Dr. Sigmund Freud. He was all about the Swadisthana Chakra. These are different systems we can key in different systems of psychology and psychotherapy, each one of these hierarchical centers or stages of consciousness. These systems are not contradictory. But it's very helpful for us to sort them out, to see at which stage or which level of consciousness they are addressing, because it's very different at different levels of our consciousness. So in our state of mind today we find ourselves as embodied souls, and we're preoccupied with security and with survival and with sense pleasure and with the five pleasures of life and with power and with self-empowerment. And this is kind of where we are at this stage. We found success at this stage, and all of these levels we have moved up through these levels. They've been secured. We have mastered them, and we have enjoyed them. And it's at this stage now that we begin to feel some kind of disappointment, or that is to say, we feel some kind of awakening of spiritual consciousness, some kind of that we want more, we want something greater, we want something higher in our spiritual life. We want something more to fulfill our life. And therefore, we have to, the question arises in our mind, how can I raise my consciousness? That is, the journey is not complete. I want to continue on in the hierarchy. So now the question is, how can I raise my consciousness? We have to raise our consciousness. And how do you raise your consciousness? Well, now our minds, if we can visualize consciousness, it's like attention. Our attention is like water. And just as water, when it's poured, it rains on a mountain. The water runs down the side of the mountain, runs down the mountain, then down into the streams, into the ocean. So similarly, our consciousness today is the natural flow of our minds, are down and out. And that we dissipate all of our power. Our power is being dissipated, just as the water, the power of the water, the power of a huge, the electrical cable has been broken and cut, and it's just flapping in the wind. It's dissipating all that energy. All of that power is being lost. Therefore, the first thing we have to do to raise our consciousness power is to stop that, that is to turn our attention inward and to stop that and to turn our attention, the flow of our power inward and upward. Sri Ramakrishna tells us about the farmer, that he's going to irrigate his whole rice fields. And in the morning he goes out and he opens the sluice gate, and the water comes rushing in the field. It's going to fill up that whole field for the new, just newly sprouting rice. So the water is gushing in. He goes home. He has his lunch. Comes back in the late afternoon. He looks and he finds there that his whole field is still, well, the ground is damp, but there's no water in the field. What happened? Well, he sees that all those dikes, that he has rats in his field. The holes have been gnawed through those dikes, and all the water's flowed out through the holes. And so all the water is dissipated. So the first thing he has to do is he has to repair those dikes. Then when he opens the water will begin to flow into the field. That's number one. How do we raise our consciousness? That's number one. Number two is we have a problem. The problem is the water, which is rained up on the top of the mountain, has flown down and out. And our project now is going to be to reverse the flow of the rivers so that they don't go down, they go up. Now that's pretty hard. That's going to be a difficult. How do we do that? Well, the conscious. It may be difficult for an engineer to do that, but it's not difficult for a yogi to do that, because the consciousness that we're speaking of, the attention here, that we have power. That is, we can redirect our attention. We redirect our attention to the higher centers. And that's what meditation is all about. That's what spiritual practice in general is all about. Let's take meditation, for example. Whenever you meditate on something, you focus on it. You focus your attention. You focus your consciousness power on it. And as you focus it, just as when you pour water in the sink, it spirals round and round, forms like a kind of a whirlpool. It forms, it's a whirlpool of power. Similarly, it is when you meditate. You begin to form there's a cyclic power there which draws. It's like you've seen what is that? The story by Edgar Allan Poe, The Maelstrom. Remember that story about the great whirlpool off the coast, I think, of Norway? It's really is a whirlpool in the ocean. Huge ships get caught up in that. They go very careful. Others, they get caught up in that, and they're dragged down into the maelstrom. Similarly, it is with our consciousness. Wherever we fix our consciousness, everything will be pulled into that level. Now everything is being pulled down into those three lower levels, because that's where our consciousness is. That's where the whirlpool of our attention is. And when we begin to practice spiritual practice, we're going to begin to refocus our attention on higher centers, creating a whirlpool of a drawing power, a pulling power that will pull our minds upwards to the higher centers. The first thing that when you're given instructions when we begin your spiritual life, we begin to, saints and sages instruct us that when we begin to practice meditation, we practice by visualizing our chosen ideal in the cave of the heart. So the heart chakra, that's our first goal. That's our first place where we're going to struggle to focus our attention and our consciousness in the heart chakra. It's called the Anahata Chakra. And it is, we could call it the center of the love center. Well, that's popular terminology, kind of, but it's all about, that is the level of our awareness, the level of our psyche in which we feel, we care about others, we feel for others, we love our friends, we love our brotherly love, romantic love, all of these caring and bonding feelings that we naturally have for each other. All of that comes from our heart. Our heart is not dead. When I say that we are existing at these three lower centers, it doesn't mean all of the chakras of our body are alive. That is, they're running on energy, they're running on prana. The prana is flowing through all of the energy centers. So we're hopefully, you're alive and well, and you're feeling as a heart center. All of yoga practice assumes. It begins with the assumption that you have a healthy heart. That means you have a feeling for others, that you're bonding with others, you're engaged in loving relationship with others. That's the assumption. But the problem is, now we're talking about from spiritual point of view, spiritual practice, the problem is that this heart center, although it is very active, that is, we have thoughts and we have feelings and we have love, but it is all that is to serve the lower self. All of the powers of the heart, all those caring, loving feelings are to serve our self, which is identified with the lower chakras. That is to say, yes, we love our family and friends, but the yogis would say, well, yeah, but maybe there's different kinds of, there's a whole spectrum of love. When we talk about love, what we mean is, I love her. That means I love her because she makes me feel good. That's what I mean. And I love her because she fills a lack that I have. She completes me. That's what we mean by love. But real love is not about that. Love doesn't mean that. Love means it's not about she makes me feel good. Love means I want to make her feel good. I want the other person to feel good. That's a higher, that's what we would call true love, which is more kind of rare. That's kind of the love which comes from the heart center. It's only when our consciousness, when we begin successful to raise our consciousness, that is, our identity, that means our center of gravity, when it shifts to the heart center, that now we'll have a whole new conception of what is a friend, what is a person, what does it mean to care and to love. And at that time, all kinds of, when our self rises to that. When we ourselves are identified, it's about where is your identity? When our identity shifts to the heart center, I don't know if we're going to finish these 7 centers. Because as I look at this clock, I think, okay, well, whatever. We don't have to finish it. We'll just go as far as we can go. If we get So at that time, certainly doing spiritual practices. Now, this is when once the consciousness has risen to that's our goal, that's our immediate goal, to raise our consciousness to that level. That's a very high spiritual attainment. To become established and identified with the heart center. This is the stage at which people become. That's a stage at which you become a saint. You begin to feel, you become to have these wonderful virtues of caring not just for yourself, not just for your own family and friends, but it becomes ethnocentric, it becomes world-centered, it becomes cosmocentric feeling and compassion. And so all those are all stories about saints who have raised their consciousness to the heart center, and who now have shifted their identity to that higher center. And so that's the heart center. And it's at this heart center, this is already a very high spiritual, now we're talking spiritually, we're talking here about our spiritual consciousness, but even psychologically, we can say, well, sometimes for many people, this is a problem. This is to become that's what psychotherapy is all about. Maybe is for many, is to integrate all of your feeling self with your higher self. That is, this is all a psychological process, all the way up to the Vishuddha Chakra. Vishuddha Chakra means the level of the mind is a higher level, a level of the, it's called the Agya Chakra, or not the Agya, but that's later. This is called the Vishuddha Chakra. That's at the level of the throat. And the throat, of course, means speech. Speech means Vak. Vak is a big thing in the Rig Veda. And this is all now about the philosophy of language and about the mantra shastra and how the whole universe was created through language and how God is nothing but the knowledge of God is contained in the Vedas, and that God is speech, that the goddess of speech is created this world, and that in the Greek philosophy is called the Logos. That's the principle of reason, which governs the universe. That is well, in Platonic, just talking psychologically, we know that in the psyche, in the government of the psyche, the tripartite psyche of Plato, for example, if we want to have a harmonious mind and heart, that is our self, our soul, if we want a harmonious soul, everything has to be in order. And to be in order means that our appetites, our desires, our bodies, all of these lower chakras are controlled by higher power. That is, by the power of the nous, that is to say, the rational, intuitive faculty, the faculty of reason that distinguishes us from animals. That's what gives us the power of reason, and that marks the growth of an ordinary, just psychologically, in the growth of a person. We understand that a person grows. He becomes a mature person. That's what maturity means, that you've gotten control over your appetites and your passions and your emotion. Doesn't mean they're negated. Doesn't mean that they're repressed. But it means that they're integrated. They're under the control of your wisdom. Rather than call it reason, you don't like the word reason, okay? Let's use the word wisdom. Let's use the virtue of of becoming established in prudence and in higher thought. It's at this stage in psychologically, maturity in Jungian psychology, maybe he popularized it, is when we achieve individuation. Individuation means when you become a person becomes a full individual. You know, it's a whole growth process, but to become a full individual, you have to transcend your body and the feeling self and the persona and the shadow and become all that's integrated. You become an individual. Only when you become a fully actualized individual. And hopefully today, and of course, yoga assumes that all of us, that all would be, before you begin yoga, that you are in fact a fully mature individual, that you have an ordered psyche, that your psyche is under the rule of reason and wisdom, that you're living wisely. That's all baseline assumption before we begin the practice of yoga. So what is the spiritual practice then of raising our consciousness to this higher level? Now we're at the level of the heart center, continuing our spiritual growth, that level of individuation. When our identity shifts from the heart to the throat center, then we realize that's the consciousness realize that we are not, now we are self-actualized individuals. At that time we realize we're not individuals yet. That our so-called individuality is really, although it's true that there is a deep structure called your individuality, but it's not really, literally, etymologically an individual. It's still a structure. It's still made of parts. And when your identity rises to this higher level, then you become suddenly aware that you are not an individual, that this is not yourself. Yourself, that you are not the individual you thought yourself to be, that all of the individual parts, that those are just parts of a higher self. That is your soul. You're becoming conscious of your soul, your true self. It's at this stage that spiritual practice, that we begin to do practice. Different kinds of yoga, jnana yoga, vichara, viveka, in the path of devotion and bhakti. When the mind rises to this level, then all the saints, they only want to talk about God. That's why it's called Vishuddha Chakra. That is a pure speech. It's all about purifying our speech. Our speech, of course, is our thought. Our speech is our mind. It's our conscious, articulated thought. So to have that pure, that's why the bhaktas, they only want to speak of God. They want to hear about God. They want to listen to divine music about God. Each chakra has its own kind of music. As we modulate upward, our music changes. The bhaktas want to hear spiritual, what we call spiritual music. Music, devotional music about God. They want to speak about God. And that is at the level of the throat chakra. And so let's see where we are. Okay, we're up there. Well, we're getting there. We're up to the throat chakra. Let's look back a little bit now. Let's look back a little bit over this process. See, I titled this thing, The Spectrum of Consciousness. Later on, I thought, well, maybe that's not exactly a little misleading, because when we think of a spectrum, we think of a color spectrum. We think of the electromagnetic spectrum, and that is a horizontal spectrum. And whereas this that we're speaking of, this chakra system, It is a hierarchy. It's a hierarchy. The spectrum, that is to say, the spectrum is more of what they call a taxonomy, the words, but a hierarchy of terms. This is what we're talking about this morning is hierarchy. Higher means angels, like these are the echelons of the angels. And maybe you don't like the word higher and lower, but you see now, this is a fundamental teaching of the wisdom of the East, not just of this chakra system. There's the analogy. There's a spatial analogy, a vertical, of moving from the low to the high. And if you read about the chakras in different popular literature, you're not going to read that. You're going to read about horizontal. That is to say, that this system, as I'm explaining it to you this morning, is this is a status hierarchy. There is greater, there's a normative judgment at each level. One is higher than the other. What does that mean? What does that mean that it's higher? It means that it's more evolved. Higher means that it's moved from the darkness up towards the light. It means that it's moved from the gross upward to that's a value judgment, but it's moved from the gross to the subtle to the causal. It's moved from the body to the pranamaya kosha. That is to say, see, goes together with the different ideas of the Upanishads. Although this morning we're talking about Tantra, this is consistent with the teaching of the Upanishadic teaching of the 5 kinds of self that we have. We have a bodily self, that's the Annamaya Atma. Then we have the Pranamaya Atma, the energy, emotional self. Then we have a mental self, the heart center. Then we have the Vijnanamaya Atma. That's kind of our wisdom self. And so there's an evolution. And at each stage of evolution, we find ourselves, we have a new self. We have a new sense of who we are when we move. Now we've gone through these lower stages, so maybe now they're kind of in our subconscious. But I see that if we look at it kind of, there's different levels of awareness. At each level we have a new sense of self. We just imagine a man who's climbing like maybe a ladder. You're climbing a ladder. Or you're climbing a mountain. And at each level, you have a different worldview. Your worldview is changing as you're moving upwards. All of your needs are changing. Your idea of what is food. What's the food, the Mooladhara Chakra, that survivalist out in the wilderness? His idea of what is food is one thing. The level, however, of a devotee and a bhakta who wants to hear sweet music, he wants the food of divine music. See, that's his food. Intellectual food, emotional food. All of this is keyed into the chakras. And so we have different needs. We have different, our values change, our value system. At each level there's a structure to our values. And at each level, values, of course, are hierarchical. And at each level we rearrange the hierarchy of our values. And so you may in fact look back in your life and see that your values have radically changed with the awakening of spiritual consciousness. And so it's at that stage there at the heart center. You can read, at the Shuddha Chakra, when all the words come to an end. Read there in the Gospel, Sri Ramakrishna describes as a consciousness as he rises up through these chakras. He's describing to the devotees how he feels, what he's thinking at that stage. But when he gets to this level, he it goes into samadhi. That is, he goes into the fourth, the higher chakra. That is it's called the Agya Chakra, which is at the, often you've seen, maybe Indian women, they wear that tilak on the forehead, symbolize that the third eye, found in many different ancient cultures, found on your dollar bill, right? The great eye of Horus, the eye of Ra and Isis. These are old Egyptian symbols. In Indian mythology, it's the third eye of Shiva. Shiva has a you don't see it very well in iconography because his eye is closed. That's because he doesn't open his eye. Whenever he opens his eye, then everything is burnt up and is destroyed. And there's whole mythology and stories about the eye of Shiva. So Shiva and the third that third eye of wisdom. It's associated with in the brain with the pineal gland. The pineal gland is a mysterious. Nobody knew much about it. René Descartes, the father of Western philosophy, he identified it as the soul, the location of the soul. You know, he had a big problem with the. Let me see what time we got. He had a problem with integrating the mind to the body and mind, and so he located the soul there, and this is in the pineal gland because seems to be the central location between the consciousness of the substance of the conscious mind and that of the body. And it's a favorite subject for psychedelic gurus and for those who are interested in neurotheology, because because of the biochemistry of that particular gland. That was associated with, that's of course in theology, associated with the ultimate reality, with samadhis, with the highest samadhis, the nirvikalpa samadhi, which is the goal and purpose of our spiritual life. So, well, we kind of gave short shrift to the higher centers, but what can we do? I hope that you will see that this system of the chakras, although it is esoteric, it is baffling. Yes, you can get, it's easy to go down the rabbit hole when you begin to investigate some of the magical, numerological, and linguistic aspects of this. Nevertheless, it's very helpful to us. It gives us a good sort system for understanding a lot of stuff about our own psychology and our own spiritual growth.